Every relationship that ends is not a loss. It is a revelation of who you truly are beneath the masks you wear. When someone walks away from your life, especially someone who loved you with their whole heart, they leave behind something far more valuable than memories. They leave behind a mirror. Raise your hand if you've ever felt completely blindsided when someone you cared about suddenly had enough and walked away. Keep it up. Look around. You're not alone in this experience, but you might be alone in understanding what it really means. What happens when the person who loved you unconditionally finally walks away and you're left standing in the silence with the one person you've been hiding from your entire life, yourself? For those who have built their identity around emotional independence, around needing no one, around being the strong one who never breaks, this moment becomes the earthquake that reveals just how unstable your foundation really was. There's a specific type of person who attracts deep, empathic souls like magnets. They appear strong, self-sufficient, successful. They seem to have it all figured out. But underneath that polished exterior lives someone who learned very early that emotions are dangerous, that vulnerability is weakness, that the safest way to live is to need nothing from anyone. These are the avoidant souls among us, and when they lose someone who loved them completely, something inside them doesn't just break, it explodes. You see, when you've spent your entire life building walls around your heart, you forget that those walls aren't just keeping pain out, they're keeping life out, they're keeping love out, they're keeping you out. And the person who just walked away, they were the only one who somehow managed to climb over those walls and love you anyway. Now they're gone. And for the first time in perhaps decades, you're feeling everything you've spent a lifetime avoiding. Let me share something with you about how this really works. There was a man I knew, brilliant, successful, owned 3 companies, had everything money could buy. His wife was what we call a super empath. She felt everything, his moods, his stress, his unexpressed anger, his buried sadness. For 15 years, she absorbed his emotions like a sponge, never realizing she was doing it. She would feel anxious when he was worried about business. She would feel sad when he was struggling with something he couldn't even name. She became his emotional surrogate without either of them understanding what was happening. When she finally left, exhausted from carrying the weight of 2 people's emotional lives, he thought he would feel relief. He told his friends, "Finally, I can have some peace." She was always so emotional, always wanting to talk about feelings, but 3 weeks later, something happened that changed everything. He woke up in the middle of the night, sobbing, and he had no idea why. The grief hit him like a tsunami. Not just grief about losing her, but grief he had been carrying for years about his father's death, about opportunities he had missed, about the life he had built that looked successful from the outside, but felt empty on the inside. For the first time in his adult life, he was feeling his own emotions without someone else processing them for him, and it nearly destroyed him. This is what happens when an avoidant person loses their empathic part. The empath wasn't just sharing their life, they were sharing their emotional load. They were unconsciously processing and carrying emotions that the avoidant person couldn't or wouldn't deal with. When that support system disappears, everything that was being held comes crashing down at once. But here's what most people don't understand about this process. It's not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough disguised as a crisis. Think about a tree that looks magnificent and strong from a distance. Its trunk is thick, its branches reach toward the sky, its leaves are full and green. But if you could see beneath the ground, you would discover that its root system is shallow, spread wide, but never going deep. The tree has learned to survive by taking what it needs from the surface, never developing the deep roots that would truly nourish. Then one day a storm comes, not even a particularly severe storm, and that beautiful tree falls over because it had no foundation. This is the illusion of independence that many people live in. They appear strong because they've learned to take what they need from others without giving back in equal measure. They've learned to survive emotionally by staying on the surface, never going deep enough to develop their own emotional strength. And the empathic people in their life, they become the hidden root system, providing emotional stability and nourishment while remaining invisible underground. When that support system is suddenly gone, the illusion crumbles. What looked like strength reveals itself as elaborate self-protection. What seemed like independence shows itself to be a sophisticated form of dependence. And what felt like emotional control turns out to be emotional poverty. Now I want you to consider something that might be uncomfortable. If you're recognizing yourself in this description, there's a part of you that wants to resist what I'm saying. There's a voice in your head right now arguing with me, insisting that you really are strong, that you really are independent, that the person who left was the problem, not you. That voice, that's not your wisdom speaking. That's your fear. The fear that if you acknowledge how much you actually needed that person, how much they were doing for you emotionally, how much they were giving while you were taking, you'll have to face something terrifying. You'll have to face the places inside you that are broken, wounded, afraid. You'll have to face the child inside you who learned that needing someone was dangerous, that asking for help was weakness, that the only way to be safe was to be completely self-reliant. But here's the truth that will set you free, even though it might hurt at first. You cannot blame someone else for your emotional poverty. You cannot make another person responsible for your inability to feel, to connect, to be present. You cannot point to someone else's sensitivity and call it the problem when the real issue is your own numbness. The person who just walked out of your life wasn't abandoning you. They were graduating from the role of being your emotional caretaker, your feelings surrogate, your unpaid therapist. They were choosing to stop doing for you what you needed to learn to do for yourself. And their graduation creates an opportunity for your own graduation, if you're willing to take it. This is where the real choice begins. You can spend your energy defending your limitations, explaining why you are the way you are, justifying your patterns, and blaming the person who left for being too much or too sensitive. Or you can use this crisis as the doorway it was always meant to be. The doorway into your own emotional wholeness. You see, empathic people don't just randomly show up in avoidant people's lives. They're drawn there for a reason, and that reason isn't to enable your emotional avoidance forever. They come into your life as unconscious teachers, showing you through their own emotional fluency what you're capable of when you stop hiding from your own heart. They love you not because you're emotionally available, but because they can sense the emotional capacity lying dormant inside. They see your potential even when you can't see it yourself. But there comes a moment in every empathic person's life when they realize they can't love someone into wholeness. They can't feel for someone else indefinitely. They can't carry two people's emotional loads forever. When they reach that point and choose to leave, they're not giving up on love. They're giving up on settling for half a relationship. The breakdown you're experiencing right now, the overwhelming emotions, the sense that everything is falling apart, this isn't punishment. This is preparation. You're being prepared to become the whole person you were always meant to be. You're being prepared to love from fullness instead of emptiness, to give from abundance instead of scarcity, to connect from strength instead of neediness. Think of a caterpillar that wraps itself in a cocoon. From the outside, it looks like death. The caterpillar's body literally dissolves, breaks down completely. If you could speak to the caterpillar in the middle of that process, it would probably tell you it was dying, that everything was falling apart, that it was the end. But what's actually happening is transformation so complete, so fundamental, that the creature that emerges is almost unrecognizable from the one that went in. Your breakdown is your cocoon. Your dissolution is your preparation for. The question is, are you going to resist this process and stay stuck in the caterpillar stage? Or are you going to surrender to the transformation that's trying to happen through you? The empathic person who left your life has given you something precious, though it might not feel like a gift right now. They've given you the opportunity to meet yourself, to feel your own feelings, to develop your own emotional muscle. They've forced you into a situation where you have to learn to do for yourself what they were doing for you all along. This is not about becoming someone different. This is about becoming who you actually are underneath all the protection, all the walls, all the strategies you developed to keep yourself. This is about remembering that you were born with the same emotional capacity as any other human being. but somewhere along the way you learned to shut it down, to numb it, to hide from it. The pain you're feeling right now is not just about losing them. It's about finally feeling everything you've been avoiding feeling for years, maybe decades. It's grief, yes, but it's also relief. Relief that you don't have to pretend to be invulnerable anymore. Relief that you don't have to carry the exhausting burden of being the person who needs nothing from anyone. Relief that you can finally stop performing strength and start developing real strength. The kind that comes from knowing yourself completely and loving yourself. And real strength isn't about needing no one. Real strength is about knowing your needs, communicating them clearly and meeting them responsibly, while remaining genuinely available to support others in meeting theirs. Real independence isn't about emotional isolation. Real independence is about emotional sovereignty, being the author of your own emotional experience while staying open to authentic connection with others. The person who left wasn't too sensitive. You weren't too much for them. What happened was that they outgrew the role of being your emotional training wheels. And now it's time for you to learn to ride on your own. This is your graduation ceremony, even though it doesn't feel like a celebration. And here's something beautiful about this process. When you learn to feel your own feelings, to process your own emotions, to meet your own needs, you don't become less capable of love. You become more capable of love. Real, the kind that flows from fullness rather than neediness, from choice rather than compulsion, from wholeness rather than brokenness. The mirror that your former partner left behind reflects not just your limitations, but your possibility. It shows you not just what you've been avoiding, but what you're capable of becoming. It reveals not just your wounds, but your potential for healing. And most importantly, it shows you that the love you've been seeking from others has been inside you all along, waiting for you to turn toward it, to acknowledge it, to nurture it into full expression. You are standing at the threshold of the most important relationship of your life, your relationship with yourself. Everything that comes after this, every connection you make, every love you give and receive, will be built on the foundation you choose to create right now. The question isn't whether you can survive this loss. The question is whether you're ready to use this loss as the beginning of finding yourself. Life operates on cycles as predictable as the seasons, and understanding these cycles gives you the power to work with them rather than against. The relationship you just lost, the pattern you just lived through, the breakdown you're experiencing right now. None of this happened by accident. It happened because you've been unconsciously participating in a dance that was choreographed long before you met that empathic soul who just walked away. How many of you have noticed that you tend to attract the same type of person over and over again? Raise your hand. Now keep them up if those relationships tend to end in similar ways. Look around, you're witnessing one of the most powerful laws of human experience. We don't attract what we want. We attract what we are, and until we change what we are, we'll keep attracting the same lessons in different packages. There's a specific cycle that plays out when someone who avoids emotional intimacy meets someone who craves emotional connection. It's as predictable as winter following autumn, and just as necessary for growth. The cycle has 3 distinct phases, and understanding them will change everything about how you approach relationships from this moment forward. The first phase is what I call the rescue romance. The avoidant person feels inexplicably drawn to the empath's warmth, their ability to feel deeply, their emotional fluency. It's like someone who has been living in emotional winter suddenly feels the warmth of spring. The empath represents everything the avoidant person has shut down in themselves. The ability to be present, to feel fully, to love without reservation. The attraction is magnetic because the empath carries the missing pieces of the avoidant person's soul. But here's what the avoidant person doesn't realize in this phase. They're not falling in love with the empath as a separate person. They're falling in love with their own capacity for feeling, reflected back to them through someone else's emotional mirror. The empath becomes a drug that makes them feel alive, connected, whole. And like any drug, the effect is powerful but temporary, because it's coming from outside rather than being generated from within. The empath, meanwhile, is drawn to the avoidant person's apparent strength, their calm demeanor, their seeming ability to handle anything life throws at them. What the empath doesn't recognize is that this isn't true strength. It's emotional numbness masquerading as stability. They mistake emotional unavailability for mysterious depth. They interpret the avoidant person's neediness disguised as independence as an exciting challenge. They think they've found someone who won't drain them emotionally, not realizing they've found someone who will drain them in ways they never imagined possible. The second phase is the comfortable dysfunction. This is where the real damage happens, and it can last for months, years, even decades. The empath unconsciously begins doing the emotional work for both people in the relationship. They start anticipating the avoidant person's needs before they're expressed. They begin absorbing and processing the avoidant person's unexpressed emotions. They become hypervigilant to mood changes, trying to maintain harmony by managing their partner's emotional temperature. The avoidant person, meanwhile, settles into this arrangement, like sinking into a comfortable chair. They get all the benefits of emotional connection without having to do any of the work. Their stress is absorbed by their partner. Their emotional needs are met without them having to identify or communicate them. They can continue living in their emotional cocoon while someone else handles the messy business of actually feeling things. This phase feels stable to both people, but it's the stability of stagnation, not growth. The empath gradually loses themselves in the process of maintaining the relationship. The avoidant person gradually becomes more emotionally dependent, while believing they're maintaining their independence. Both people are moving further away from wholeness, not closer to. Then comes the third phase, the awakening crisis. This is where we find ourselves right now. The empath reaches a breaking point where they can no longer carry the emotional weight of two people. They begin to set boundaries, to ask for emotional reciprocity, to demand that their partner show up as an equal participant in the relationship. To the avoidant person, this feels like an attack on their autonomy, a threat to their carefully constructed emotional fortress. What happens next determines everything. Most avoidant people respond to this crisis by withdrawing further, by building higher walls, by convincing themselves that their partner has become too demanding, too needy, too much. They choose the familiar pain of isolation over the unfamiliar territory of emotional growth. And so the empath leaves, exhausted and heartbroken, and the cycle begins again with someone new. But you're here listening to this, which means you have another choice. You can use this crisis as the spiritual curriculum it was always meant to be. You see, the intensity of what you're feeling right now, this overwhelming flood of emotions, this sense that everything is falling apart, this isn't random chaos, this is your soul's advanced course in human development. Every emotion you suppressed, every feeling you avoided, every part of yourself you pushed down into the shadows, is now demanding to be acknowledged, integrated, healed. There was a woman I worked with who went through exactly this process. She was a brilliant attorney, controlled and successful in every area of her life, except relationships. When her empathic partner finally left after 6 years together, she described the next 3 months as emotional hell. But as we worked together, she began to understand that what felt like hell was actually her own emotional garden that had been neglected for decades, finally demanding attention. She had been so busy building her career, so focused on achieving external success, that she had never learned to tend to her inner life. Her partner had been doing that work unconsciously, watering the emotional garden she had abandoned. When her partner left, the garden didn't die. It exploded with growth, demanding care, attention, nourishment. The overwhelming feelings weren't a sign that something was wrong with her. They were a sign that something was finally right. This is what's happening to you right now. Your emotional garden has been neglected, and now it's demanding attention. The person who just left your life was the gardener you never knew you needed, and now you're being forced to learn how to tend your own soil, plant your own seeds, water your own growth. But here's where most people get stuck. They try to avoid the discomfort of learning these new skills. They look for ways to numb the feelings, to escape the intensity, to find someone new who will go back to doing the emotional work for them. They fall into patterns that guarantee they'll repeat this cycle again and again. Who here has ever caught themselves doing something that you knew wasn't good for you, but you did it anyway. Every hand should be up, because this is the human condition. We are creatures of pattern, and most of our patterns were formed when we were too young to choose them consciously. We learned to survive by developing strategies that worked in our family of origin, and then we spent the rest of our lives unconsciously applying those strategies to situations where they no longer serve us. The avoidant patterns that led to your current crisis weren't created in your adult relationships. They were created in childhood as brilliant survival strategies. Maybe you learned that emotional needs were burdens because your caregivers were overwhelmed. Maybe you discovered that being self-sufficient was safer than risking disappointment. Maybe you figured out that achieving success was more reliable than seeking connection. These patterns served you well when you were young and powerless, but they're sabotaging you now that you're an adult, capable of genuine intimacy. The most common self-sabotage pattern among avoidant people is what I call emotional withholding. You unconsciously ration your emotional availability like it's a limited resource that must be carefully conserved. You give just enough to keep the relationship functional, but never enough to create true intimacy. You share thoughts, but not feelings, facts, but not fears, opinions, but not vulnerabilities. Another pattern is the success trap. You use your achievements, your busy schedule, your important responsibilities as shields against emotional intimacy. You've convinced yourself that your work is more important than your relationships, that your goals are more worthy of your attention than your partner's need. You've made productivity your god and efficiency your religion, all to avoid the messy, unpredictable, uncontrollable experience of genuine human connection. Then there's the independence addiction. You've made needing no one into a virtue, never recognizing that true strength isn't about needing no one. It's about knowing your needs and meeting them responsibly while remaining genuinely available to others. You've confused emotional self-reliance with emotional isolation, never understanding that interdependence is the foundation of all healthy relationships. But the most destructive pattern of all is the blame game. When relationships become difficult, when partners ask for more emotional presence, when the natural conflicts of intimacy arise, you point to their sensitivity as the problem. You call them needy when they ask for emotional connection. You label them demanding when they request emotional reciprocity. You make their capacity for feeling into their flaw, never recognizing that your incapacity for feeling is the real issue. These patterns don't make you a bad person. They make you a hurt person who learned to protect themselves in the only ways available at the time. But protection that once served you can become a prison if you don't consciously choose to update your strategies as you grow. The power comes in recognizing these patterns as they're happening, not just after the damage is done. It comes in developing what I call emotional radar, the ability to notice when you're starting to withdraw, when you're beginning to use work or other activities to avoid intimacy, when you're feeling the urge to create distance because things are getting too real. This awareness isn't about judging yourself or forcing yourself to be different. It's about creating space between your automatic reactions and your conscious responses. When you notice yourself starting to withdraw, you can ask, what am I feeling right now that's making me want to run away? When you catch yourself dismissing your partner's emotional needs, you can ask, what would it look like to take their feelings seriously, even if I don't understand them? The same patterns that created your current breakdown can be transformed into the patterns that create break. But transformation requires something most people are unwilling to give: consistent daily practice. It requires treating your emotional development with the same seriousness you've brought to your career development. It requires showing up for the small moments, not just the big gesture. Change doesn't happen through dramatic proclamations or sudden personality overhauls. It happens through tiny course corrections made consistently over time. It happens when you choose presence over productivity for just 5 minutes a day. It happens when you share one real feeling instead of hiding behind clever observations. It happens when you ask your partner how they're doing and then actually listen to the answer instead of planning your response. The cycle ends when you become conscious of the pattern breaks when you stop defending it. The transformation begins when you stop seeing your emotional sensitivity as weakness and start seeing it as the pathway home to yourself. You've been given a gift, though it's wrapped in the painful packaging of law. The gift is the opportunity to become whole, to learn to love from fullness instead of emptiness, to build relationships on the foundation of mutual growth rather than unconscious survival patterns. The question isn't whether you're capable of this transformation. The question is whether you're willing to do the daily work that makes transformation possible. Extraordinary relationships are built on ordinary daily practices that most people are unwilling to do consistently. The transformation you're seeking isn't going to happen through a weekend workshop or a moment of inspiration. It's going to happen through small, seemingly insignificant actions, repeated day after day, until they become the architecture of your new life. Who here has ever started an exercise program with great enthusiasm, only to quit after a few weeks? Raise your hands, keep them up if you've done this more than once. Now, who has ever tried to change a relationship pattern and fallen back into old habits when things got difficult? Look around. You're seeing the difference between intention and discipline, between wanting change and creating change. Emotional fitness requires the same commitment as physical fitness. You wouldn't expect to develop strong muscles by working out once a month when you feel motivated. You wouldn't expect to build cardiovascular endurance by running only when it's convenient. Yet most people approach their emotional development exactly this way. They engage with their feelings only when crisis forces them to, then wonder why they keep repeating the same pattern. The first discipline that will change everything is what I call the emotional inventory. Every morning, before you check your phone, before you start your day, before you engage with anyone else's energy, you spend 10 minutes asking yourself 3 simple questions. What am I feeling right now? What am I afraid of today? What do I need to give myself the emotional nourishment I require? This sounds simple, but for someone who has spent years avoiding that inner life, it can feel almost impossible at first. You might sit with these questions and feel nothing, or feel so much that it's overwhelming. Both responses are normal. Both are part of the process. The key is consistency, not perfection. You're not trying to become an emotional expert you're simply establishing a relationship with your inner world, the same way you might establish a relationship with a neighbor you've been avoiding for years. At first, the conversations might be awkward, stilted, uncomfortable, but over time, as trust builds, they become natural, valuable, essential. The second discipline is what I call vulnerability practice. Once a day, every single day, you share one genuine feeling with another human being. Not a thought disguised as a feeling. Not an observation about someone else's behavior. A real feeling about your actual experience. Instead of saying, I think this project is going well, you might say, I'm excited about where this project is heading, and also a little nervous that I might disappoint people. Instead of that meeting was productive, you might share, I felt heard and valued in that meeting, and it reminded me how much I need that kind of collaboration. Instead of analyzing someone else's behavior, you express how their behavior affected you. This practice will feel awkward, artificial, even dangerous at first. Your survival system will resist it with every tool it has. It will tell you that sharing feelings makes you weak, that people will judge you, that you're being inappropriate or unprofessional. This resistance isn't evidence that you're doing something wrong. It's evidence that you're doing something important. The third discipline is presence practice. Several times throughout each day, you give your complete attention to whoever you're with for a specific period of time. Not half your attention while you think about your to-do list. Not distracted attention while you mentally plan your response to what they're saying. Complete, focused, generous attention. This might mean putting your phone in another room during dinner. It might mean looking into someone's eyes when they're speaking to you instead of scanning the environment for more interesting stimuli. It might mean asking follow-up questions about what someone just shared, instead of immediately shifting the conversation to your own experience. These 3 practices, emotional inventory, vulnerability practice, and presence practice, are like laying the foundation of a house. Each brick seems small and insignificant, but together they create the structure that will support everything else you build. But understanding the practices isn't enough. You need to understand why they work, and more importantly, Why that's so difficult for someone with your particular history. You've spent years developing expertise in emotional avoidance. Learning emotional engagement feels like learning a foreign language as an adult. It's possible, but it requires patience, repetition, and a willingness to feel foolish while you're learning. The goal isn't to become someone who feels everything all the time. That's not emotional intelligence, that's emotional chaos. Real emotional intelligence means learning to feel accurately and respond appropriately. It means developing the capacity to distinguish between fear and excitement, between sadness and disappointment, between anger and hurt. Most people live their entire lives with the emotional vocabulary of a 5-year-old. They know happy, sad, mad, and scared, and they try to navigate the complexity of adult relationships with these crude tools. It's like trying to perform surgery with a butter knife. True emotional development means expanding your emotional vocabulary so you can identify what you're actually experiencing. When you say you're stressed, are you feeling overwhelmed, anxious, frustrated, or pressure? When you say you're fine, are you feeling content, numb, resigned, or defensive? The more precisely you can identify your emotions, the more effectively you can respond to them. This precision requires practice. It requires what I call emotional witnessing, the ability to observe your feelings without immediately acting on them. When you feel the urge to withdraw from your partner during a difficult conversation, instead of automatically creating distance, you pause and notice, I'm feeling criticized right now, and my impulse is to protect myself by pulling away. This pause creates space for choice. Instead of being controlled by your automatic reactions, you can choose how to respond. You might say, I'm feeling defensive right now, and I want to make sure I'm really hearing what you're trying to tell me. Can you help me understand what's most important to you in this conversation? This kind of response transforms conflict from a threat into an opportunity for connection. It turns your partner into an ally in your growth rather than an enemy of your comfort. It demonstrates emotional courage, the willingness to stay present with discomfort rather than escaping into familiar patterns. But developing emotional intelligence isn't just about managing difficult moments. It's about learning to recognize and cultivate positive emotions as well. When was the last time you felt genuine gratitude, not just intellectual appreciation, but the warm, expansive feeling of being truly thankful? When did you last experience awe, wonder, contentment, or joy? Many people who have spent years in emotional survival mode have forgotten how to access these states naturally. They've become so focused on avoiding pain that they've also blocked their capacity for pleasure. They've become so good at protecting themselves that they've forgotten how to receive goodness when it's offered. Part of your emotional rehabilitation involves learning to receive love, appreciation, support, and care without immediately deflecting it or trying to reciprocate it. It means allowing yourself to feel the impact of someone's kindness without rushing to even the score. It means accepting compliments without minimizing them or changing the subject. This brings us to the art of authentic connection, which is different from both the isolation you've been living in and the enmeshed relationships you've been avoiding. Authentic connection means showing up as who you really are, not who you think you should be or who you think others want you to be. It means sharing your struggles without making others responsible for fixing them. It means asking for support without becoming dependent. It means offering help without taking over. It means being honest about your limitations without using them as excuses. It means staying present during emotional conversations instead of leaving your body and going into your head. Authentic connection requires what I call emotional transparency, the willingness to let others see your real experience, rather than your managed presentation. This doesn't mean dumping your emotions on others or making them responsible for your healing. It means sharing your journey honestly while taking responsibility for your own growth. There's a man I know who transformed his entire life by implementing these practices. He was a successful engineer who had never had a relationship last longer than 2 years. When his empathic partner left, he was devastated but also curious. Instead of immediately looking for someone new or throwing himself into work, he committed to 1 year of focused emotional development. Every morning, he did his emotional inventory. Every day, he practiced vulnerability with at least one person. Every evening, he reflected on moments when he had been truly present and moments when he had checked out. He tracked his progress like he would track any important project, not obsessively, but consistent. The first 3 months were the hardest. He felt like he was learning to walk again. Emotions that had been numb for decades started coming online. He cried more in those 3 months than he had in the previous 10 years, but he stayed with the process, trusting that the discomfort was temporary and the growth was permanent. After 6 months, people started commenting on how different he seemed. He was more relaxed, more present, more genuinely interested in others. After a year, he entered a new relationship, but this time as a whole person, capable of genuine intimacy, rather than someone looking for someone else to complete him. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was the accumulation of thousands of small choices to stay present, to feel his feelings, to communicate honestly, to ask for what he needed, to offer what he could give, without keeping score. This is what's available to you, but only if you're willing to treat your emotional development as seriously as you've treated your professional development. Only if you're willing to show up for the small moments, not just the big crises. Only if you're willing to practice when it's inconvenient, when you don't feel like it, when it would be easier to fall back into old patterns. The daily practice framework I'm giving you isn't complicated, but it requires commitment. Morning emotional inventory. 10 minutes of honest self-reflection. Daily vulnerability practice. One genuine feeling shared with another person. Evening presence practice. 10 minutes of gratitude and reflection on what you learned about yourself that day. These practices will feel strange at first because they're the opposite of everything you've trained yourself to do. You've trained yourself to avoid feelings, to hide vulnerability, to stay busy enough that you don't have to reflect on your experience. These practices systematically undo that training and replace it with skills that actually serve adult relationships. But you can't do this work in isolation. You need to surround yourself with people who support your growth, not people who enable your old patterns. This might mean having difficult conversations with friends who are used to the old version of you. It might mean setting boundaries with family members who try to pull you back into familiar dysfunction. It might mean finding new communities where emotional honesty is valued rather than fear. You need what I call emotional mentors, people who model the kind of emotional maturity you're developing. These might be friends who have done their own healing work, therapists who can guide your process, or even authors and teachers whose wisdom resonates with your journey. You need to study emotional health the way you once studied for your career. You also need to learn how to ask for support without becoming dependent, and how to offer support without taking over. Healthy relationships are built on what we call interdependence. Two whole people choosing to share their lives, not two broken people trying to complete each other. When you catch yourself falling into old patterns, and you will, the key is to notice, without judgment, and redirect, without drama. I'm withdrawing right now becomes information, not a crisis. I'm feeling overwhelmed by this conversation becomes a chance to practice staying present, not an excuse to escape. I don't know how to handle this feeling becomes an opportunity to learn, not evidence that you're broke. The person who left your life has given you the greatest gift possible, though it's taken time to recognize. They've given you the opportunity to become emotionally whole, to learn to love from fullness instead of emptiness, to build relationships on mutual growth rather than unconscious patterns. But gifts must be unwrapped to be received. Skills must be practiced to be developed. Insights must be applied to create transformation. Everything I've shared with you tonight is useless unless you choose to implement it starting tomorrow morning. You cannot love another person from an empty emotional well, and you cannot give what you do not possess. The work you do on yourself isn't selfish. It's the most generous thing you can do for everyone you love for the rest of your life. Every feeling you learn to feel fully. Every vulnerability you learn to share appropriately. Every moment you learn to be truly present creates the foundation for relationships that nourish rather than drain, that inspire rather than exhaust, that grow rather than stagnate. Today, right now, you have a choice that will determine the trajectory of every relationship you have from this moment forward. You can continue defending the patterns that created your loneliness, explaining why you are the way you are, and hoping someone will come along who requires so little from you emotionally that you can stay exactly as you are. Or you can begin practicing the disciplines that create genuine connection, that develop emotional courage, that transform you into someone capable of the love you've always wanted. The empath who left has graduated from the role of being your emotional surrogate. The question is, are you ready to graduate too? Are you ready to stop being someone who happens to love and become someone who knows how to love? Are you ready to stop looking for someone who won't trigger your growth and start becoming someone worthy of a conscious partnership? The breakdown ends today. The breakthrough begins now. Your emotional muscles are waiting to be developed. Your capacity for love is waiting to be unleashed. Your future relationships are waiting for the person you're capable of becoming. Don't waste another day defending your limitations. Start building your emotional strength. Start practicing presence. Start sharing your truth. Start creating the life and the love you actually want. Everything changes when you change. Everything heals when you heal. Everything grows when you grow. The choice is yours, and the time is now.